Hello, my name is Claire Provost, and this is a recording of a presentation that I prepared for and delivered at the IATI Community Exchange in Copenhagen, Denmark in March 2023. The focus of this presentation is why and how to use IATI data for public interest accountability investigations. After a brief introduction, we'll turn to the case study of a recent investigation I worked on for CNN using IATI data. I learned a lot from that project and others I've worked on, and we'll share some of those lessons towards the end. In person in Copenhagen, we also had a question and discussion section and some moments for interaction throughout the presentation, which I have cut from this recording for ease and brevity, but you might still see some signs of them on some of the slides. So what do I mean by accountability investigations? And the answer is many things, potentially. Accountability investigations are both a focused and broad area of journalism. They could look at, for example, laws, commitments, pledges, and promises, whether they're being evaded, broken, or potentially undermined by other things. They may focus on specific communities, such as intended beneficiaries of projects or taxpayers that provide funding for things. They may involve elements of fact-checking, following the money, and often multiple sources of information to piece together an independent picture of a situation that is not reliant on official accounts, and also in particular not reliant on a, a single official account. They may reveal wrongdoing, negligence, and process failures, but also human consequences of these things. So I'm an investigative journalist, and I actually started using aid data in my stories around 2011, so more than a decade ago, when I was at The Guardian on the global development desk. Since then, I've watched IATI develop and become increasingly useful and accessible. I saw this particularly in the recent story using IATI data for CNN that I will talk more about now. So this story, published in December 2022, revealed how millions in aid from donors that had pledged to support LGBT rights went to projects of religious groups in Ghana campaigning for a new anti-LGBT bill. It was co-authored by myself and Nana Darkoa Sekiyama in Ghana, and accompanied by a TV package on an episode of the Amanpour program. Now, this story was fundamentally about a mismatch between, on one side, fierce opposition to LGBT rights, and on the other, strong public commitments to support those rights. It was also about the aid flows connecting these two things, which was surprising and raised questions about due diligence, the use of intermediary organizations, and how to ensure that aid funding, in particular aid funding that can flow through multiple steps and multiple organizations, follows rights commitments and doesn't directly or indirectly or inadvertently or unintentionally undermine those commitments. So this screen shows a table of the data that was used in this story and the main sources, which were the OECD's creditor reporting system, CRS data, where what was particularly useful was the long description sections of project records. Then IATI data, where countrydata.iatistandard.org and dportal.org were particularly helpful in enabling us to find UK aid money that had been spent through an intermediary NGO and that we hadn't been able to see through the CRS's data alone. But then also an important source of information here was also donor disclosures direct to us. So we brought our findings from the data sources to each of the relevant donors and intermediary organizations. And in the case of the US, for example, we were told that there had been an error in the data and that the real total was a bit less. Germany, meanwhile, provided confirmation of other funding that we hadn't found in the data. So we accessed IATI, in terms of IATI data, we accessed it from this portal, downloading all records since 2016 with all of the different all the different fields possible where Ghana was the recipient country. Searching these records for the names of organizations involved in pushing for the anti-LGBT bill, we found the Christian Council of Ghana, which is a coalition of those groups. In the downloaded data, the records mentioning the Christian Council of Ghana had the IATI identifier displayed on this screen, which we then put into the dportal.org site to see more clearly that this money was, number one, a series of disbursements to the Christian Council of Ghana from the UK NGO Christian Aid between 2018 and 2020. Number two, that this money was uh, internally allocated from a Christian aid income source. And then number three, that income source was a 5-year contract with the UK Department for International Development, which was the main governmental body in the UK responsible for UK aid. So being able to see clearly how UK aid via Christian Aid went to the Christian Council of Ghana like this was critical, was not something we could see in the CRS data, and was thanks to IATI and improvements in the traceability of aid. Though there is still a lot of work to do in that area more broadly, which is very important for monitoring and accountability. But for this story, we also needed other information beyond that kind of financial data, including to build a timeline of events that showed clearly how, in this case, the Christian Council of Ghana had issued public anti-LGBT statements before, during, and after its receipt of UK aid, which were easy to find. Meanwhile, also easy to find was how the UK had made public commitments to LGBT rights before, during, and after these funding flows. It had even become, in the middle of these flows, co-chair of the International Equal Rights Coalition, which exists to, quote, protect the human rights of LGBT people around the world. My colleague and co-author Nana Darkoa Sakyama in Ghana and a CNN film crew that traveled there also collected other human sources that helped to explain why this matters, the lives and rights at stake in the country's anti-LGBT backlash and that are threatened by the bill. We also, as mentioned before, engaged in some lengthy communications with relevant donors and intermediary organizations, with a brief summary of some of the donor responses displayed on this screen as well. Now, in terms of things that I learned from this work, a top one is certainly the improvements in IATI data and its accessibility that really do offer new and exciting opportunities for accountability investigations, including because of the traceability point mentioned before. I also found new or newish portals like dportal.org and countrydata.iatistandard.org really useful, with the caveats that they can still get better and become more useful and more used. Um, then there's also the value of analyzing text fields and not just numbers. And on this, it's important to note that there is currently really variable levels of information and text in the title and description fields of project records between different donors. And also among different donors, like within their own records, the amount of information can be quite variable. There's also the need to combine data sets with other sources to identify public interest and tell more complete stories. Um, the need and then the need to be aware of ongoing information gaps, as we saw in this story in particular with the added information from donor disclosures, things we had not found in the data, or things in the case of the US that they corrected from the data, really showed us both that there are still ongoing information gaps, but also reasons to treat IATI data as well as CRS data with a bit of caution, and to double check numbers with ideally directly with donors and intermediaries and get them to double check them. We also saw that there was, I learned that there's again very high public and media interest in work like this. And so it would be great for more of it to be done. Now, it's crucial when working with IATI, but also with any data source, to understand both what can be found and where, and um, both the what and the where, do take time to learn. It means things like understanding the IATI data standard itself and what it contains, how publishing happens, who publishes, etc. But also things about its about contents like sector codes and their descriptions that come from the OECD and their code lists, but are also in IATI and important to understand IATI data. But it also means things like understanding the different portals and ways to access IATI data in this case, and for example, how to modify custom views and downloads of the data from portals like country development, finance data, and again with IATI, but also with other data sources, it's important, I think, to approach the data with public interest hypotheses, meaning knowing, having an idea of what you're looking for or like why you're looking at it before you do. So in the case of the CNN story, which came about in the context of discussions and international condemnation of the anti-LGBT bill in Ghana, I wanted to see what international donors were doing in that country, who they were partnering with. And so I looked only at records for that one country, Ghana, and only in relatively recent years, for any mentions of sexual rights and LGBT rights, but also for any mentions of organizations that were actively and publicly opposing those rights. And with IATI, but also other data sources, unique identifiers are really such gifts to journalists to be able to help piece different bits of information together, and for the traceability reasons mentioned before. So understanding which such IDs exist, for what, how they're used, how they can be used, can really be game changing. Then my last overall lesson learned and to share is about establishing and leveraging innovative collaborations to do this work. The CNN story that I talked about was a journalist-activist collaboration as well as a cross-border collaboration, and that my co-author, Nana Darkoa, is a Ghanaian feminist activist as well as a writer, while I'm an investigative journalist based in Italy, one of the donor countries, and bringing together those different experiences, perspectives, backgrounds, and locations critically were very important for this story and bringing it about. Um, and so I wanted to now just thank you for watching this recording. I really do hope to see many more journalists as well as civil society organizations leveraging the power of IATI open data for accountability investigations around the world. I think the data source is getting to the point where there's a lot of potential, and it's really time to see as many people use it as possible. Thank you very much.